Why do IT projects fail? It is because of technology, or it is because of development team isn't good enough, or is there something else? As from my experience, IT project doesn't fail just because of one big reason. Small problems start adding up. And if you don't address these problems early, these problems becomes big enough to stop the project. Hey, this is Deepak Panchal. Welcome back to Delivery Decode. In my last video, we talked about what a technical project manager really does. And in today's video, we'll talk about something that every technical project manager should understand. Why do IT projects fail? So today I'm going to explain you why IT projects fail by using a real IT projects I worked on. So I will keep company name and project name confidential, but the lesson learned are real. First reason, poor requirement and no clear success metrics. Sometimes business know that they have a problem, but they don't know what they want to build, and that's a problem. So before you start building a solution, you should always ask three questions. What problem are we solving? Do we have our success metrics defined? The third one, which is equally important, are our internal stakeholders are aligned on the initiative? Because this is really important to get an alignment from your internal stakeholder. If your internal stakeholders are not aligned and you start the initiative, that initiative and solution might look good from the business perspective, but that definitely creates problem during the delivery. I experienced this on one of my projects that I was doing with a grid company. They wanted to implement a grid management solution, but the main problem was they had not defined how the success should look like in the beginning of the project. So when we started requirement gathering, we came to know that there wasn't a common understanding that what this solution should actually deliver. So requirements started changing, and once requirement start getting changed and the change is frequent, it is very difficult for you to plan the project. And that's what happened in that project. Eventually that initiative was stopped. And that brings me to the second reason why IT project fail, right? You have a good vendor, you have a good business stakeholder, you have a good leadership, you have a good IT team, but what if they're not working together to achieve a single goal? This is what happened in that project which I was handling for this power company. There was a legacy system, the old legacy system, from which this vendor needed the required information to create the new solution. So he reached out to them multiple times, but the legacy system stakeholders were failed to provide the right information at the right time. So that gap became so big that an escalation was required. So we escalated this to the leadership multiple times, but that issue was never resolved. Over time, leadership support was also gone down. So eventually we came at the point where it was nearly impossible to recover the project, and at last company stopped that initiative. And the third reason is uncontrolled scope and unrealistic expectation. So I'm sure that every project manager must have experienced this already in their career. Projects start with one scope, and gradually when you move forward, you get to hear that from the stakeholder, hey, can we add this? Can we do that? And scope start getting bigger. But the main problem is deadline doesn't move, budget doesn't move, right? Team size doesn't move, but scope keep getting increased. So this is what happened in my project that I was handling for the power company. When that project was started, the business was not very clear about the full scope. But as our understanding evolved, new requirement and new expectation emerged. And that's where the expectation became unrealistic. So at the end of the requirement gathering, the gap between initial scope and the scope that we captured after the requirement gathering becomes so big that it was nearly impossible to do to complete that scope within the same defined timeline and budget. And that's where, just because of this gap, that power company stopped that initiative. And the fourth reason is underestimating the technical complexity. Sometimes it happens that a project looks very good from outside, but when you start working on it, you come to know that there are legacy systems, there are old API integrations, there are old tools, there are technical debt. The task that look 2 week, now that becomes 2 month. And this is what happened in one of my projects that I handled for the power company. Right, there was a old legacy system, and it was very difficult to understand just because there was very poor documentation. The stakeholder who built that legacy system left the company. There was no proper KT was provided to the people who took over that legacy system, right? So whenever the vendor required the information from the legacy system, they were unable to provide it, and just because of that, vendor was not able to produce the new solution. Eventually, the gap became so big that leadership has to stop that project. And that's why I always say every technical project manager should understand enough technology. I want to make a clear distinction that identifying a risk is not same as managing the risk. So in the same project, our vendor was dependent on the legacy system IT team for the required information. So the dependency was known, but somebody has to own it, somebody has to follow up, somebody has to escalate. So we had our risk management plan in place and we followed our mitigation plan. In our mitigation plan, the old legacy system needed to be upgraded, but that decision was never taken on time. In fact, that decision was never taken just because of economical reason. And just because of that, it started impacting other parts of the project. And eventually, just because of economical reason, that project was stopped by leadership. Sometimes business focus more on creating technology, but they forget about the people who will use it. You can build a great solution, right? But what if people don't understand it, don't want to use it, are not ready to adapt the change? Project can still fail. It may not deliver the value that was expected from the project. So as a TPM, you always ask, are we delivering the right technology? But at the same time, you should always ask, is organization ready to adopt it? The next reason is weak governance. And governance doesn't mean having more meetings. Good governance simple mean three things: who own the decision, who will take the decision, and what will happen if decisions are delayed. So in my project, we had a hard dependency on this IT legacy system, which was never resolved. We escalated it, but an escalation without an action doesn't solve the problem. So if in your project, important decisions are getting delayed, timeline becomes harder and harder to recover. Eventually, in your project, you reach a point where your project isn't just delayed, but the original delivery plan is no longer realistic. So, what can a TPM do about all this? TPMs cannot stop problems from happening, but they can identify them early. So, when I start a project, I simply want answers to few basic questions. What problem are we solving? Do we have our success metrics defined? Are important stakeholders aligned? Are requirements clear? Do we know what are the hard dependencies? Who owns our risks? What decisions are still pending? And most importantly, what potentially could stop the project from succeeding? And that is probably the biggest lesson I have learned. Project doesn't fail overnight. Usually you can see the warning sign early in the project. A requirement isn't clear, a risk is getting pushed to the next meeting, a decision is delayed, dependencies are not getting resolved, a stakeholder isn't agree. So each one of these problems looks small, but when these small problems start adding up, then it becomes very difficult to recover the project from. Projects rarely fail overnight. Identifying a risk is not managing it. TPM cannot prevent every problem from happening. The biggest lesson for me is simple. You don't need a perfect project plan in a project, but you do need to recognize that when your project is moving away from the project plan and act early. So if you found this video useful, please do subscribe to Deal with Decode. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.